Sometimes a simple act of kindness creates ripples that travel far beyond what we can imagine. A lady welcomes Bruce Springsteen on a snowy day. Just a warm smile, just a hot cup of coffee. But that lady, she had no idea who she was helping, and Bruce had no idea what was coming next. Months later, when everything seemed lost, when bankruptcy threatened to destroy everything she had built, Bruce Springsteen remembered. He remembered that snowy day. He remembered her kindness. And what he did next will restore your faith in humanity forever. Full story. The snow fell thick and heavy on Route 9 that December evening, each flake catching the neon glow of Murphy's Diner like tiny fragments of forgotten dreams. The interstate had become a treacherous ribbon of ice, forcing travelers to seek refuge wherever they could find it. Steam rose from the diner's windows, creating a beacon of warmth in the bitter New Jersey cold. Inside, the familiar sounds of comfort filled the air. The sizzle of bacon on the griddle, the gentle clink of coffee cups against saucers, the soft hum of conversation between weary souls seeking solace from the storm. The smell of home-cooked meals and fresh coffee created an atmosphere that spoke of simpler times, when diners like this were the heartbeat of small American towns. Margaret O'Sullivan wiped her weathered hands on her apron as she watched the snow accumulate against the windows. At 62, she had been running Murphy's Diner for over 20 years, ever since her late husband Patrick had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The lines around her eyes told stories of countless early mornings, late nights, and the endless cycle of serving others while fighting her own battles in silence. The diner hadn't been the same since the new highway bypass opened 2 years ago. Traffic had dwindled to a trickle, and regular customers had become as rare as spring flowers in winter. Margaret's savings had slowly evaporated, and the stack of unpaid bills hidden beneath the cash register grew thicker each month. She knew the end was approaching, but she couldn't bear to admit it. Not yet. The bell above the door chimed, and a figure stepped inside, shaking snow from a worn leather jacket. He was tall, with graying hair and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 songs. His face was familiar in that way, that made you think you'd seen him somewhere before, but you couldn't quite place where. "Rough night to be out there," Margaret said, approaching him with a warm smile that had become second nature after decades of greeting strangers. "Just find a seat anywhere you'd like, honey. I'll get you some coffee to warm you up." Bruce Springsteen, though Margaret didn't recognize him, nodded gratefully and slid into a booth near the window. He watched the snow swirl in the parking lot lights, remembering similar nights from his childhood, when his family would stop at places just like this during long drives across the country. "Thank you," he said quietly, as Margaret poured steaming coffee into a thick white mug. "This storm came out of nowhere." "They always do around here," Margaret replied, her New Jersey accent soft and welcoming. "Been watching the weather for 40 years, and it still surprises me every time. You traveling far?" "Just passing through," Bruce said, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "Heading home after some time away." There was something in his voice, a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion, that Margaret recognized immediately. She had heard it in her own voice many times over the past few years. "Well, you take all the time you need," she said. "Storm like this, nobody should be out on those roads. You hungry? I make a mean meatloaf, and the apple pie came out of the oven about an hour ago." Bruce smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in weeks. "That sounds perfect." As Margaret bustled back to the kitchen, Bruce looked around the diner with new eyes. The red vinyl booths were worn but clean. The checkered floor showed years of faithful service, and the walls were covered with local photographs, testimonials from satisfied customers, and a few faded newspaper clippings celebrating community events. This was America in its purest form, honest, hard-working, unpretentious. Other customers came and went as the evening wore on. A truck driver grateful for hot soup, an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary with coffee and pie, a young mother trying to keep her toddler entertained while they waited for her husband to fix their car. Margaret treated each person with the same gentle attention, never rushing, never making anyone feel unwelcome. Bruce watched her work, noticing how she remembered everyone's preferences, how she checked on customers without being intrusive, how she managed to create an atmosphere of family even among strangers. When a customer at the counter complained loudly about his burger being too well done, Margaret simply smiled, apologized, and made him a new one without charging extra. "No problem at all," she said cheerfully. "We all have those days when nothing goes quite right." The complainer left without leaving a tip, but Margaret's smile never wavered. As the evening grew later, the snow continued to fall, and the diner gradually emptied until only Bruce remained. Margaret refilled his coffee cup and slid into the booth across from him. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" she asked. "Been on my feet since 5 this morning." "Please," Bruce said. "I've been watching you work all evening. You make it look easy, but I can tell it's not." Margaret laughed, a sound both tired and warm. "Nothing worthwhile ever is, I suppose. My Patrick used to say that the best things in life require the most effort. Marriage, raising children, building something that lasts." He sounds like a wise man. He was. Margaret's eyes grew distant. "Lost him 8 years ago now. Heart attack, right here in the kitchen. One minute he was telling me about a new recipe he wanted to try. The next minute—" She shook her head. "Life changes in an instant, doesn't it?" Bruce nodded, thinking of his own losses, his own struggles with fame, and the isolation it often brought. "It does. But you kept going. What else do you do?" Margaret shrugged. "People need places like this. Somewhere to find comfort, somewhere to feel human again. Patrick and we dreamed of creating a place where strangers could become friends, where everyone felt welcome no matter what they were going through." She gestured around the diner with obvious pride, though Bruce could see cracks in the ceiling, worn spots in the linoleum, and other signs that money was tight. "You've succeeded," Bruce said quietly. "This place, it feels like home." Margaret's eyes brightened. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in months. These days it feels like we're fighting an uphill battle. The new highway, chain restaurants, delivery apps. Small places like this are becoming extinct. But you're still here." "For now," Margaret said, her voice dropping. She looked toward the kitchen where she could see the stack of bills waiting for her attention. "Sometimes I wonder if Patrick would understand the choices I'm having to make." Before Bruce could ask what she meant, the phone rang. Margaret excused herself to answer it, her voice becoming strained as she spoke quietly to whoever was on the other end. "Yes, I understand," she was saying. "But surely we can work something out. I see. Yes, I'll be in touch." When she returned to the table, her face had changed. The warmth was still there, but underneath it Bruce could see worry, fear, and the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying too much weight for too long. "Everything all right?" he asked. Margaret forced a smile. "Oh, just business matters, nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." But her hands were shaking slightly as she cleared away empty cups from nearby tables. Bruce finished his meal in thoughtful silence, watching Margaret work. When he was ready to leave, he approached the counter to pay his bill. "What do I owe you?" he asked. $14.50, Margaret said, ringing up the total on an old-fashioned cash register that looked like it had been there since the diner opened. Bruce pulled out his wallet and placed a $50 bill on the counter. "Oh, honey, I can't make change for that," Margaret said. "Let me see what I have in the register." "Keep it," Bruce said simply. Margaret's eyes widened. "I can't accept this. That's too much." "It's not enough," Bruce replied, looking directly into her eyes. "Thank you for tonight, for the food, for the warmth, for treating a stranger like family. This place, what you do here, it matters more than you know." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. You don't know how much this helps." Bruce zipped up his jacket and headed toward the door. As he reached for the handle, he turned back. "What's your name?" he asked. "Margaret," she said. "Margaret O'Sullivan." "Margaret," Bruce repeated, as if committing it to memory. "Thank you for tonight." The bell chimed as he left, and Margaret watched through the window as he disappeared into the swirling snow. She looked down at the $50 bill in her hand, then at the stack of unpaid bills beside the register. It wouldn't solve her problems, but for tonight it gave her hope. What Margaret didn't know was that the phone call she'd received earlier had been from the bank. They were calling her loan due in 30 days. 23 years of building a life, a business, a community gathering place. All of it would be gone before the next snowfall if she couldn't come up with $28,000. 3 months passed, like a blur of increasingly desperate measures. Margaret had tried everything. She'd applied for loans at every bank within 50 miles, reached out to distant relatives, even considered selling her mother's wedding ring. Nothing worked. Small business loans required collateral she didn't have, and her credit had been damaged by months of late payments on utilities and suppliers. The final notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a courier who couldn't meet her eyes as he handed her the envelope. Margaret sat in the empty diner, it was nearly empty most days now, and read the words that confirmed her worst fears. She had until April 15th to pay the full amount owed, or the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings. Margaret folded the letter carefully and placed it in her apron pocket. Then she walked to the coffee maker, poured herself a cup, and sat in the booth where she'd talked with the kind stranger 3 months earlier. She allowed herself 5 minutes to cry. 5 minutes to grieve for Patrick's dreams, for her own dreams, for all the customers who would lose their gathering place, for the employees she'd have to let go. Then she wiped her eyes, stood up, and began preparing for the lunch rush that might not come. Word traveled quickly in small towns. By the end of the week, everyone knew that Murphy's Diner was closing. Regular customers stopped by to say goodbye, sharing memories and expressing their sadness. Sarah Martinez, who had worked as a waitress for 10 years, cried openly as she served what might be her last customers. "It's not just a job," Sarah explained to anyone who would listen. "Margaret gave me a chance when no one else would. Single mom, no experience. She hired me anyway and taught me everything I know. This place saved my life." Local newspaper reporter Tom Chen heard about the closure and decided to write a human interest story. He spent an afternoon at the diner, interviewing Margaret and documenting what would soon be lost. "Places like Murphy's Diner are the heartbeat of American communities," he wrote. "They're where deals are made with handshakes, where teenagers have their first dates, where families gather to celebrate and mourn. When we lose these gathering places, we lose something essential about who we are as a people." The article was published in the local weekly paper on March 30th, accompanied by photos of Margaret standing behind the counter where she'd spent 23 years serving others. Tom had captured her dignity in the face of defeat, her refusal to blame anyone for her circumstances, her gratitude for the years she'd been able to keep Patrick's dream alive. The article was picked up by a few regional papers, then by a blogger who specialized in small-town America stories. Social media began to buzz with shares and comments from people who had their own memories of similar diners, their own stories of kindness received from people like Margaret. It was on April 3rd that Bruce Springsteen's assistant, Jennifer Walsh, brought the article to his attention. She had been monitoring social media mentions of small-town America stories as research for his upcoming album, and something about the photograph of Margaret O'Sullivan caught her eye. "Bruce," she said, entering his home studio where he was working on new lyrics, "you need to see this." She handed him a printed copy of Tom Chen's article. Bruce read it slowly, his expression growing more intent with each paragraph. When he reached Margaret's quote, "We tried to create a place where strangers could become friends, where everyone felt welcome no matter what they were going through," he looked up sharply. "Murphy's Diner," he said quietly. "Route 9. You know it?" Bruce set down his guitar and leaned back in his chair. "I stopped there during a snowstorm in December. Spent the evening there. The owner, Margaret, He paused, remembering the warmth in her voice, the way she had made him feel human again during a particularly difficult period in his life. "She was kind to me," he said finally. "Really kind. And I could tell she was struggling. But she never let it show to her customers. She just kept serving, kept smiling, kept making everyone feel welcome. Jennifer waited, recognizing the look on Bruce's face that meant he was working through something important. $28,000, Bruce said, reading the article again. That's what she needs to save the diner. Are you thinking about... I'm thinking about a lot of things, Bruce said. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his property in Colt's Neck. How many places like Murphy's have we lost already? How many Margaret O'Sullivans are out there, fighting to keep something good alive while the world changes around them? That evening, Bruce drove his truck to Route 9. Murphy's diner looked smaller than he remembered, somehow more fragile. The neon sign flickered intermittently, and several parking spaces were marked off with orange cones where the asphalt had cracked. But warm light still glowed from the windows, and he could see Margaret moving around inside, serving the handful of customers who remained loyal to the end. Bruce sat in his truck for several minutes, thinking. This wasn't about charity. It was about justice. About recognizing the value of what Margaret had created and ensuring it survived. About honoring the kind of America he'd been singing about his entire career. He pulled out his phone and called his business manager. "Eddie," he said when the call connected, "I need you to do something for me." Margaret was closing the diner alone on the evening of April 10th when she noticed the black sedan parked across the street. She'd seen it there the previous evening as well, and her first thought was that it must be someone from the bank documenting the property for the foreclosure process. She finished wiping down tables and was counting the day's receipts, pitifully small, as they had been for weeks, when she heard the bell above the door chime. She looked up to see a well-dressed man in his 50s approaching the counter. "I'm sorry," she said. "We're closed for the evening." "Mrs. O'Sullivan?" the man asked politely. "My name is Edward Martinez, and I represent the Springsteen Foundation. I was hoping we could speak for a few minutes about your situation here." Margaret's heart sank. Another foundation wanting to document the closure, perhaps, or offering some small token of assistance that wouldn't change anything. "I appreciate your concern," she said carefully, "but there's really nothing to discuss. The bank has made its decision, and I've accepted it." Edward smiled gently. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, I think you misunderstand why I'm here. May I sit down?" Curious despite herself, Margaret gestured toward a nearby booth. Edward sat across from her and placed a manila folder on the table. "3 months ago," he began, "a friend of mine stopped here during a snowstorm. He was having a difficult time in his life, and he found comfort in this place. More than that, he found hope in your kindness." Margaret frowned, trying to remember which customer might have made such an impression. "He's asked me to help ensure that Murphy's Diner continues serving the community for many years to come," Edward continued. "We've prepared an offer to purchase your outstanding debt from the bank and restructure it with terms that will allow you to remain here indefinitely." He opened the folder and removed a check, placing it face down on the table. "Furthermore," Edward said, "we'd like to establish a small endowment that will help cover maintenance and improvements to ensure the diner remains a viable business." Margaret stared at the folder, unable to process what she was hearing. "I don't understand. Who is this friend of yours?" "Someone who believes in what you do here," Edward said simply. "Someone who understands the value of places where strangers can become friends." With trembling hands, Margaret turned over the check. The amount made her gasp. $35,000 made out to Murphy's Diner. "This is impossible," she whispered. "I can't accept this. I don't even know who this person is." "You do know him," Edward said quietly. "You served him coffee and apple pie on a snowy December night. You treated him with kindness when he needed it most. You created a moment of human connection that reminded him why places like this matter." Understanding began to dawn on Margaret's face. "The man in the leather jacket," she said slowly. "Tall, greying hair, kind eyes." Edward nodded. "He wanted me to give you this as well." He handed her an envelope with her name written in careful handwriting. Margaret opened the envelope with shaking hands and read, Dear Margaret, you probably don't remember me, just another traveler who found shelter from a storm. But I remember you. I remember your warmth, your grace, the way you made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Murphy's Diner isn't just a restaurant, it's a sanctuary. It's proof that America is still a place where strangers take care of each other, where communities gather, where simple kindness can change someone's entire day. I've been fortunate in my life, and that fortune means nothing if I can't use it to preserve something as precious as what you've built here. This isn't charity. It's an investment in the kind of world I want to live in. Keep serving coffee with a smile. Keep making strangers feel like family. Keep showing the rest of us what grace looks like. Your friend, Bruce Springsteen. Margaret read the letter 3 times before the tears made it impossible to continue. When she looked up, Edward was waiting patiently, his own eyes moist with emotion. "Is this real?" she asked. "Very real," Edward confirmed. "The check will clear the bank debt with money left over for improvements. The endowment will provide a safety net for the future. And Bruce asked me to mention that he hopes to stop by for coffee and pie sometime soon, as a regular customer, not as a celebrity." Margaret pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. Patrick always said that angels come in disguise. "Sometimes they come in leather jackets," Edward said with a smile. The news of Murphy's Diner's salvation spread quickly through the community. Tom Chen wrote a follow-up article titled "Rockstar's Random Act of Kindness Saves Local Institution," and the story was picked up by national media outlets. But Bruce Springsteen declined all interview requests, issuing only a brief statement through his publicist. "Murphy's Diner represents the best of American hospitality and community spirit. Some things are too important to lose." Margaret used part of the money to update the kitchen equipment, repair the parking lot, and refresh the dining room while maintaining its classic character. She hired back the employees she'd had to let go, including Sarah Martinez, who cried with joy when she got the call. "You're sure this is real?" Sarah asked. "I'm afraid I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." "It's real," Margaret assured her. "More real than anything I've ever experienced." The diner experienced a surge of customers curious about the place that had inspired such generosity, but Margaret insisted on treating everyone the same way she always had, with genuine warmth and attention, regardless of whether they were locals or tourists. One evening in May, the bell above the door chimed, and Bruce Springsteen walked in quietly, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt. A few customers recognized him and whispered among themselves, but the atmosphere remained relaxed. Margaret approached his table with a coffee pot and a knowing smile. "Welcome back," she said, as if he were any regular customer returning after a brief absence. "Good to be back," Bruce replied. "How's the apple pie tonight?" "Fresh from the oven an hour ago," Margaret said. "Just the way you like it." As she served his coffee and pie, other customers gradually went back to their own conversations. Bruce ate slowly, savoring both the food and the atmosphere of contentment that filled the room. When Margaret joined him for a few minutes during a quiet period, Bruce asked about the changes she'd made. "New coffee machine," she said proudly. "And we fixed the freezer that's been acting up for 2 years. Small things, but they make a big difference." "And the endowment?" "We're putting some aside each month, just like you suggested, building a cushion for the future." Margaret paused. "Bruce, I still can't believe what you did. How do I ever thank you properly?" "You already did," Bruce said. "On a snowy night, when I needed to remember what kindness looked like. You gave me something I couldn't buy, the feeling of being welcome, of being human." "That's what this place is for," Margaret said simply. "Exactly," Bruce replied. "That's exactly why it had to survive." Over the following months, Bruce became an occasional regular, stopping by when he was in the area, always polite, always respectful of other customers' space. He never asked for special treatment and actively discouraged other customers from making a fuss over his presence. Margaret learned to read his moods, when he wanted to chat and when he preferred to sit quietly with his thoughts. She treated him exactly as she treated everyone else, with dignified kindness and respect for his humanity. One autumn evening, Bruce arrived looking particularly thoughtful. Margaret served his usual coffee and noticed he was carrying a notebook. "Working on something new?" she asked. Bruce nodded. "A song about small-town America, about places like this, people like you, about the connections that hold communities together. May I ask what inspired it?" Bruce looked around the diner, taking in the familiar sounds and sights. Families sharing meals, friends catching up over coffee, teenagers awkwardly navigating first dates, elderly couples comfortable in each other's silence. "A wise woman once told me that the best things in life require the most effort," he said, "and that people need places where strangers can become friends, where everyone feels welcome no matter what they're going through." Margaret's eyes grew bright with recognition. Patrick's words. "Your words too," Bruce said. "You've spent your life proving them true." That song, when it was eventually released, became one of Bruce's most beloved tributes to American resilience and community spirit. But he never publicly revealed its connection to Murphy's Diner or Margaret O'Sullivan, preferring to let the place maintain its authentic character without becoming a tourist destination. Years passed, and Murphy's Diner continued to thrive. Margaret trained younger staff members, including her niece Kelly, who showed the same natural warmth and attention to detail that had made the diner special. The endowment grew steadily, ensuring the diner's future stability. Margaret used some of the funds to sponsor local high school graduates who couldn't afford college, creating a scholarship program she called Patrick's Promise. "He always believed in giving people a chance," she explained to the first recipient, a young woman whose single mother worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. "This is his way of continuing to do that." Bruce remained a quiet presence in Margaret's life, stopping by every few months, always respectful, always genuine. They developed the kind of friendship that requires no explanation, 2 people who had found something valuable in each other's humanity and chose to honor it. On a December evening 5 years after their first meeting, Bruce arrived at the diner to find Margaret training a new waitress. The young woman was nervous, spilling coffee and mixing up orders, but Margaret remained patient and encouraging. "It takes time to learn," Margaret was saying. "The most important thing is to remember that every person who walks through that door has their own story, their own struggles. Our job is to make their day a little brighter." Bruce smiled, remembering his own first evening in the diner, how Margaret's simple kindness had indeed made his day and his life brighter. As he watched Margaret work, Bruce reflected on the ripple effects of that snowy night. The diner had been saved. But more than that, it had inspired others. Tom Chen's articles had led to a foundation that helped small businesses across New Jersey. Sarah Martinez had used her experience at Murphy's to open a catering business that employed other single mothers. Kelly had learned hospitality skills that would serve her throughout her life. But the most important impact might have been on Bruce himself. Margaret's example had reminded him why his music mattered, not because it made him famous or wealthy, but because it connected people, created moments of recognition and understanding, built bridges between strangers. After finishing his meal, Bruce approached the counter to pay. Margaret rang up his bill on the same old-fashioned register she'd been using for 25 years. "Same amount," she said with a smile, "but the coffee's gotten better." "Everything's gotten better," Bruce replied, placing exact change on the counter along with his usual generous tip. "Margaret, I want you to know something. That night 5 years ago when I first came here, I was going through a difficult time. I felt disconnected from everything that mattered. But sitting in that booth, watching you work, seeing how you treated every person with such respect and kindness, it reminded me who I wanted to be." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "We helped each other then." "We did," Bruce agreed, "and we still do." As he prepared to leave, Bruce turned back one more time. "Keep doing what you do, Margaret. The world needs more places like this, more people like you." "I will," Margaret promised. "As long as I'm able." The bell chimed as Bruce left, and Margaret watched him disappear into the winter evening. She looked around the diner, at the warm light, the satisfied customers, the staff who had become like family, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the chain of events that had brought them all together. A young couple was sharing a piece of apple pie at the corner booth. A truck driver was reading a paperback novel while he finished his coffee. An elderly man was telling stories to his granddaughter over hot chocolate. All of them were strangers who had become, for this moment, part of something larger than themselves. This was what Patrick had dreamed of when they first opened the diner. This was what Margaret had fought to preserve during those desperate months before Bruce's intervention. This was what made the struggle worthwhile, the simple miracle of human beings taking care of each other. Margaret wiped down the counter and began preparing for the next day, humming softly to herself. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new stories, new opportunities to practice the kind of radical kindness that transforms ordinary moments into something sacred. The snow had begun to fall again outside, just as it had that December night when a stranger in a leather jacket had walked through her door. Margaret smiled at the memory and at the countless memories yet to be made in this place, where strangers became friends, where everyone was welcome, where simple acts of kindness could change the world. In the end, that's what this story is really about. Not the celebrity or the dramatic rescue, but the everyday miracle of human connection. It's about recognizing that we all have the power to make someone's day brighter, to offer comfort to a stranger, to preserve something good in an often difficult world. Margaret O'Sullivan understood this instinctively, lived it daily, and in doing so created something that was worth saving. Bruce Springsteen recognized its value and had the means to preserve it, but the real magic happened in the countless small moments of grace that filled Murphy's Diner every single day. Sometimes the most important things in life are also the simplest: a warm cup of coffee, a kind word, a place where you belong. Sometimes an angel really does come in disguise, but more often, we're all angels to each other, if we choose to be. Never underestimate the power of kindness. The stranger you help today might change your life tomorrow. But more importantly, the kindness you show today changes you, makes you more human, more connected to the vast network of care and compassion that makes civilization possible. Murphy's Diner remains open today, serving coffee with a smile, making strangers feel like family, proving that some things, the most important things, are worth preserving. Margaret O'Sullivan continues to show us what grace looks like, one customer at a time. And somewhere out there, Bruce Springsteen is writing songs about the America he discovered in a small diner on a snowy night, an America where kindness still matters, where communities still care for their own, where the simple act of welcoming a stranger can create ripples that spread far beyond what we can imagine. This is their story. This is our story. This is the story of what's possible when we choose to see the sacred in the ordinary, the extraordinary in the everyday, the divine in the simple act of taking care of each other. As the years continued to unfold, Murphy's Diner became more than just a restaurant. It evolved into a living testament to the power of human connection. The story of Margaret's kindness and Bruce's gratitude had quietly inspired a movement of generosity that reached far beyond the walls of the small establishment on Route 9. Dr. Amanda Foster, a sociologist from Rutgers University, heard about the diner's story and decided to conduct a study on what she called reciprocal kindness networks, the way acts of generosity create expanding circles of positive impact. She spent months interviewing customers, employees and community members, documenting the subtle but profound ways that Margaret's philosophy had influenced their lives. "What I found was remarkable," Dr. Foster would later write in her academic paper. "This single establishment had become a catalyst for community transformation. People didn't just come here to eat. They came to remember what it felt like to be part of something larger than themselves. One of Dr. Foster's most compelling case studies involved Robert Chen, Tom Chen's teenage son, who had been struggling with depression and social isolation. His father had brought him to Murphy's diner one afternoon, hoping that getting out of the house might help. Margaret noticed the young man sitting quietly while his father conducted interviews for a follow-up article. She approached their table with her characteristic warmth, but instead of offering the usual pleasantries, she simply sat down and waited. "You look like someone with stories to tell," she said gently to Robert. "I'm a good listener if you ever want to share any of them." Robert, who hadn't spoken more than a few words to anyone outside his family in months, found himself opening up to this woman he'd just met. He told her about feeling overwhelmed by social media, about the pressure to succeed academically, about the sense that the world was moving too fast for him to keep up. Margaret listened without judgment, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that helped Robert articulate feelings he'd been struggling to understand. When he finished talking, she didn't offer easy solutions or empty reassurances. "The world has always moved fast," she said thoughtfully. "But I've learned that the most important things, friendship, love, kindness, purpose, they happen at their own pace. You can't rush them and you can't force them, but you can create space for them to grow." She paused, considering her words carefully. "Would you be interested in helping me with something? I've been thinking about starting a community garden behind the diner. Nothing fancy, just a place where people can grow vegetables and flowers together. But I could use someone with young eyes and fresh ideas." Robert looked skeptical. "I don't know anything about gardening." "Neither did I when I first started cooking," Margaret smiled. "But I learned by doing, with people who were patient enough to teach me. That's how the best learning happens." Over the following months, Robert became a regular fixture at the diner, arriving after school to work on the garden project. Margaret introduced him to other community members who shared his interest in environmental issues, and gradually, Robert found himself at the center of a growing group of young people committed to sustainable living practices. The garden flourished, providing fresh herbs and vegetables for the diner's menu, while serving as a gathering place for community members of all ages. Robert's confidence grew along with the plants, and by his senior year of high school, he had organized a county-wide environmental awareness campaign that earned recognition from state officials. "Margaret saved my son's life," Tom Chen told Dr. Foster during one of their interviews. "Not dramatically, not with money or fame, but by seeing him as a person worth investing in. That's her gift. She sees potential in people that they don't see in themselves." Stories like Robert's multiplied throughout the community. Sarah Martinez, the single mother who had worked as a waitress, used the catering business she'd started to provide meals for elderly residents who couldn't cook for themselves. Kelly O'Sullivan, Margaret's niece, established a mentorship program pairing high school students with local business owners. Even customers who visited only occasionally found themselves changed by their experience at Murphy's. Michael Thompson, a corporate executive from New York who stopped at the diner during a business trip, was so impressed by the atmosphere that he redesigned his company's employee break room to encourage more personal interaction among staff members. "I realized that we'd created an environment where people ate lunch at their desks, staring at screens instead of talking to each other," Thompson explained. "After spending an evening at Murphy's, watching strangers become friends over coffee and pie, I knew we had to do better." Bruce continued his quiet visits to the diner, but his involvement had evolved beyond the initial financial intervention. He began incorporating lessons learned from Margaret into his own philanthropic efforts, focusing on sustainable support rather than one-time donations. Working with Edward Martinez and the Springsteen Foundation, Bruce developed a grant program specifically designed to help small businesses create community gathering spaces. The program, officially called the Community Connection Initiative, but privately referred to by Bruce as the Margaret Model, provided both financial support and business mentoring to establishments that demonstrated genuine commitment to fostering human connection. The first recipients included a bookstore in Ohio that hosted weekly storytelling nights for seniors, a coffee shop in Vermont that offered free meeting space for support groups, and a barbershop in Tennessee that had become an informal counseling center for men dealing with unemployment and depression. What we learned from Margaret, Bruce explained to the Foundation's board of directors, is that the most valuable thing you can provide isn't just money. It's the belief that what someone is doing matters. When you validate people's efforts to create community, you give them the strength to keep going, even when times get tough. Meanwhile, Murphy's Diner continued to attract visitors from unexpected places. Dr. Patricia Williams, a grief counselor from Philadelphia, began bringing clients to the diner as part of their healing process. She had discovered that the atmosphere Margaret had created was uniquely conducive to difficult conversations and emotional breakthroughs. "There's something about this place that makes people feel safe," Dr. Williams observed. "Margaret has created an environment where vulnerability is welcomed, where people can share their struggles without fear of judgment. That's incredibly rare and incredibly valuable for healing work." One of Dr. Williams' clients was Janet Morrison, a widow in her 60s who had been struggling to find purpose after losing her husband of 42 years. During her first visit to Murphy's, Janet found herself in conversation with another customer, an elderly man named Frank, who had also recently lost his spouse. "I keep thinking I should be over this by now," Janet confided to Frank over coffee. "It's been 8 months. People expect me to be moving on." Frank nodded knowingly. "People who haven't been through it don't understand. Grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry." Margaret, overhearing their conversation, approached their table with a fresh pot of coffee and a gentle suggestion. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "we have a lot of customers who come in here looking for someone to talk to. Maybe you two would be interested in helping me start something, a kind of informal support group for people who are dealing with loss. Just coffee and conversation, nothing formal, but a place where people could share their experiences with others who understand." The Wednesday morning coffee group, as it came to be known, started with just Janet, Frank, and 2 other regular customers. Within 6 months, it had grown to include more than 20 people, ranging in age from 30 to 85, all united by their experience of significant loss and their desire to support others going through similar challenges. Margaret provided the space and the coffee, but the healing that happened around those tables was created by the participants themselves. They shared memories, offered practical advice, celebrated small victories, and simply witnessed each other's pain with compassion and understanding. "I thought my life was over when Robert died," Janet told Dr. Foster during one of her research interviews. "But this group, this place, it showed me that I still had something to offer, that my experience could help others." Margaret didn't just give us coffee, she gave us back our sense of purpose. The ripple effects continued to expand in directions no one could have predicted. A food blogger from New York visited Murphy's while researching an article about authentic American diners and was so moved by the experience that she wrote a book titled Places That Remember: How Small-Town Restaurants Preserve Community Soul. The book featured Murphy's Diner prominently, but it also highlighted dozens of similar establishments across the country, creating a network of restaurant owners who shared Margaret's philosophy of hospitality as community service. They began exchanging ideas, supporting each other through difficult periods, and collectively advocating for policies that would help small businesses survive in an increasingly corporate food landscape. Chef Antoine Dubois, owner of a high-end restaurant in Manhattan, read the book and was inspired to create a program called Dignity Dining, where his restaurant partnered with local shelters to provide elegant meals for homeless individuals, served with the same level of respect and attention given to paying customers. I learned from reading about Margaret O'Sullivan that true hospitality isn't about the quality of your linens or the price of your wine, Chef Dubois explained. It's about recognizing the humanity in every person who walks through your door and treating them accordingly. Back at Murphy's Diner, Margaret remained largely unaware of the broader movement her example had inspired. She continued to focus on the immediate needs of her community, the daily practice of kindness that had defined her life's work. But those closest to her could see the profound satisfaction she derived from watching the connections form around her. Bruce, during one of his regular visits, noticed Margaret standing quietly in the kitchen doorway, observing the dining room with the expression of deep contentment. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, approaching with his empty coffee cup. Margaret smiled, gesturing toward the scene before them. In one booth, the Wednesday morning coffee group was meeting, their conversation punctuated by gentle laughter and occasional tears. At the counter, Robert Chen was showing a group of younger teenagers plans for expanding the community garden. Near the window, a young couple was celebrating their engagement, their joy infectious enough to earn smiles from other customers. "I was just thinking about Patrick," Margaret said softly, "about how he used to say that a life well lived wasn't measured by what you accumulated, but by what you gave away. I think he would be proud of what this place has become." "I think he would be amazed," Bruce replied, but not surprised. He knew what he was marrying, someone with the gift of bringing out the best in people. Margaret blushed slightly at the compliment. Even after all these years, she remained genuinely humble about her impact on others. "I just treat people the way I'd want to be treated," she said simply, "the way Patrick taught me to treat them. It's not complicated." "The best truths never are," Bruce agreed. "But living them consistently, especially when it's difficult, that's where the real strength shows." As if to illustrate his point, the diner's bell chimed, and an obviously troubled young man entered, looking around nervously as if he wasn't sure he belonged. Several customers glanced up, taking in his wrinkled clothes, unkempt appearance, and the desperate expression in his eyes. Without hesitation, Margaret approached him with the same warm smile she offered every customer. "Good evening, honey," she said gently. "Find a seat anywhere you'd like. Can I get you some coffee to warm you up?" The young man, who later introduced himself as David Santos, had been living in his car for 3 weeks after losing his job and apartment. He had been driving aimlessly, trying to decide whether life was worth continuing, when he saw the warm lights of Murphy's Diner and decided to spend his last $5 on a cup of coffee. Margaret sensed his distress immediately. Instead of taking his order and moving on, she sat down across from him and waited patiently until he was ready to talk. David's story poured out in fragments. The layoff from his construction job, the inability to find new work, the shame of having to ask his elderly parents for help, the overwhelming sense that he had failed at everything that mattered. Margaret listened without interrupting, occasionally asking gentle questions that helped David organize his thoughts. When he finished talking, she didn't offer false reassurances or easy solutions. "It sounds like you've been carrying a very heavy load," she said simply. "Would you like some help figuring out what to do next?" Over the course of the evening, Margaret quietly orchestrated a network of support around David. She introduced him to Robert Chen's father, who had connections in the construction industry. She mentioned his situation to Frank from the Wednesday morning coffee group, who offered David a temporary place to stay while he got back on his feet. She connected him with Sarah Martinez's catering business, which needed extra help for weekend events. Most importantly, she convinced David that his current circumstances didn't define his worth as a person, that everyone deserved a chance to rebuild their life, and that asking for help was a sign of strength, not weakness. "I thought about ending it all that night," David would later tell Dr. Foster. "I was planning to drive off a bridge after I finished my coffee. But Margaret, she saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. She made me feel human again." David's transformation became another thread in the tapestry of connection that surrounded Murphy's Diner. Within 6 months, he had steady work, his own apartment, and had become a volunteer mentor for other people experiencing homelessness. His story inspired the creation of a community resource network that connected people in crisis with practical assistance and emotional support. Bruce, who had witnessed Margaret's interaction with David that evening, was once again struck by her instinctive understanding of what people needed most. "You have a gift," he told her as the evening wound down. "You see people, really see them, in a way that most of us have forgotten how to do." "Everyone has that gift," Margaret replied. "We just get busy and forget to use it. But when you slow down, when you really pay attention, you can see the stories people are carrying, the burdens they're bearing, the hopes they're protecting." She paused, wiping down a nearby table as she organized her thoughts. "Patrick used to say that everyone who walks through that door is fighting a battle we know nothing about. Our job is to make sure they don't have to fight it alone, at least not while they're here." This philosophy had become so ingrained in the culture of Murphy's Diner that newer employees absorbed it naturally. Kelly O'Sullivan, now the assistant manager, had developed her own reputation for intuitive compassion, and several of the part-time staff members had been inspired to pursue careers in social work, counseling, or community development. The diner's influence on young people was particularly profound. High school students would often stop by after school, drawn by the atmosphere of acceptance and genuine interest in their lives. Margaret had a gift for asking the right questions, not invasive or judgmental, but genuinely curious about their dreams, challenges, and perspectives. Lisa Park, a shy sophomore who had been struggling with anxiety and social isolation, became a regular after her mother brought her for dinner one evening. Margaret noticed Lisa's discomfort in social situations and began gently encouraging her to help with small tasks, refilling sugar dispensers, wiping down empty tables, organizing the community bulletin board. "She gave me jobs that required me to move around the restaurant to interact with customers in small ways," Lisa later explained. "It was like exposure therapy, but so gradual and natural that I didn't realize what was happening until I found myself actually looking forward to coming here." Lisa's confidence grew steadily, and by her senior year, she had been elected student body president and had started a peer support program at her high school. She credited Margaret with teaching her that leadership wasn't about being the loudest or most charismatic person in the room, but about paying attention to others and creating space for everyone to contribute. The community bulletin board that Lisa had helped organize became another focal point for connection. People posted requests for help, offers of service, announcements about local events, and expressions of gratitude. Margaret made sure it was updated regularly and positioned prominently near the entrance where everyone could see it. The board reflected the organic network of mutual support that had grown around the diner. Customers offered rides to medical appointments, shared garden produce, provided tutoring services, organized fundraisers for families in crisis, and celebrated each other's milestones. It became a physical manifestation of Margaret's belief that communities thrive when people look out for one another. Dr. Foster's research eventually caught the attention of other academics, leading to a multi-university study on third places, locations that serve as informal gathering spots between home and work. Murphy's Diner became a case study in how such places could be intentionally cultivated to maximize their community-building potential. "What Margaret O'Sullivan has created," wrote Dr. James Richardson, a community development specialist from Harvard, "represents a masterclass in social capital formation. She has demonstrated that with genuine care, consistent values, and patient investment in relationships, a single individual can transform the social fabric of an entire community." The academic attention led to invitations for Margaret to speak at conferences and workshops, but she consistently declined, preferring to focus her energy on the daily work of the diner. She did agree to host visits from other restaurant owners and community organizers who wanted to learn from her example, but she always emphasized that her approach couldn't be replicated through techniques or strategies. You can't fake caring about people, she would tell visitors. Either you genuinely want to help others feel valued and connected, or you don't. Everything else flows from that basic orientation. Bruce continued to be amazed by Margaret's influence on everyone around her. During one of his visits, he met a group of business school students who had driven down from Princeton to interview Margaret about her management philosophy. "We're studying organizational culture," one of the students explained to Bruce. "Our professor said that if we want to understand how to create environments where people thrive, we should study places like this." Bruce watched Margaret patiently answer their questions, explaining her hiring practices. She looked for kindness first, skills second, her approach to customer service, treat every person as if they were a beloved family member, and her method for handling difficult situations, listen first, judge never, find solutions together. "The students left here with pages of notes," Bruce observed to Margaret after they had gone, "but I wonder if they understood that what they were really witnessing can't be taught in a classroom." "Maybe not the specifics," Margaret agreed, "but the principles can be. Treat people with dignity. Pay attention to what they need. Create spaces where everyone feels welcome. Those aren't complicated ideas." "Simple ideas," Bruce said, "but profound in their impact." As Murphy's Diner entered its 10th year under the protection of the endowment Bruce had established, the establishment had become something unprecedented, a small-town restaurant that had inspired a national conversation about community, kindness, and the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. Food Network producers had approached Margaret multiple times about featuring the diner in various shows, but she had politely declined each offer. Her concern was that media attention would change the fundamental character of the place, turning it into a destination rather than a community gathering spot. "Fame can be a kind of poison," she told Bruce during one of their conversations about the media interest. "It makes people self-conscious, changes their motivations. I'd rather keep doing what we do quietly than risk losing what makes it special." Bruce understood completely. His own experience with celebrity had taught him how easily public attention could distort authentic relationships and genuine moments of connection. "You're protecting something precious," he agreed. "But you should know that the impact of what you do here reaches far beyond what you can see." He was right. The network of people who had been touched by Margaret's example continued to expand in ways both visible and invisible. Former customers carried her approach to hospitality into their own workplaces, families, and communities. The Wednesday morning coffee group model had been replicated in dozens of other locations. The Community Connection Initiative had supported nearly 100 small businesses in creating more welcoming, community-focused environments. But perhaps the most significant impact was the simplest. Margaret had reminded thousands of people that small acts of kindness matter, that everyone has the power to make someone else's day a little brighter, and that authentic human connection is both possible and necessary in an increasingly isolated world. On a quiet Tuesday evening in November, as Margaret was preparing to close the diner, she found a letter that someone had slipped under the door. It was handwritten on simple notebook paper, and it read, "Dear Mrs. O'Sullivan, you don't know me, but I wanted to thank you for something that happened 3 years ago. I was driving through on my way to, well, I was planning to hurt myself. I stopped at your diner because I wanted one last good meal. You served me coffee and apple pie, and you talked to me like I mattered. You asked about my dreams, listened to my story. And when I told you I was a writer, you asked if you could read something I'd written. No one had ever asked me that before. I left your diner with a reason to keep living. I finished the novel I'd been working on. It was published last month. I'm writing to thank you and to tell you that I'm okay now. Better than okay. I think about that night often, and I try to pass on the kindness you showed me. I hope someday I can stop by again and show you the book that exists because you cared enough to listen to a stranger's dreams. With eternal gratitude, Rachel Morrison. Margaret read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She folded it carefully and placed it in the special box where she kept similar notes. Messages from customers whose lives had been touched by their experience at the diner. There were dozens of such letters now, each one a testament to the ripple effects of simple kindness. Margaret treasured them not because they praised her, but because they reminded her why her work mattered, why the long hours and financial struggles had been worthwhile. When Bruce arrived for his usual coffee later that week, Margaret showed him Rachel's letter. "This is why we do what we do," she said quietly. "Not for the recognition or the praise, but for the chance to remind people that they matter, that their dreams are worth pursuing, that someone believes in them." Bruce nodded, thinking of his own first night at the diner, how Margaret's kindness had reminded him of his own worth during a particularly dark period in his life. "The beautiful thing," he said, "is that you'll probably never know the full extent of your impact. Every person you've helped has gone on to help others, and those people have helped still others. It's an endless chain of connection and care." Margaret smiled, looking around the familiar space that had become the center of so much healing and hope. "That's exactly what Patrick would have wanted," she said. "Not just a successful business, but a place that made the world a little bit better, one person at a time." As closing time approached and the last customers lingered over coffee and conversation, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. The near bankruptcy that had threatened everything, Bruce's unexpected generosity, the years of growth and connection that had followed. It all seemed like a story too good to be true, but it was her life, their shared reality. The diner hummed with quiet contentment as people finished their meals, said their goodbyes, and stepped out into the November evening carrying with them the warmth of human connection. Margaret began her closing routine, but she moved slowly, savoring the peaceful atmosphere that settled over the space like a blessing. This was her life's work, creating moments of grace in an often graceless world, reminding people of their shared humanity and proving that kindness, patience, and genuine care could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. And somewhere in the gathering dusk, Bruce Springsteen was driving home, carrying with him renewed inspiration for the songs he would write about the America he had discovered in a small diner on Route 9. An America where strangers still cared for each other, where communities still gathered to support their own, where the simple act of serving coffee with a smile could change the world, one cup at a time. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your own stories of unexpected kindness in the comments below. In a world that often feels divided, these reminders of our shared humanity matter more than ever. What act of kindness, given or received, has stayed with you over the years? We'd love to hear about it.